back to the good old days. Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back to the good old days.
Oh, yeah.
Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back
old school. Let's go right back in the day. Let's take
Let me take you back.
Let's go right back in the day.
Talo falava malole suifua maua malelangia mama. Ni sambole vinaka ke munisaka na wikanda mai viti. Hello everyone and welcome to Talanoa Tupe. The 2020 general election will now be held on the 17th of October, along with the end-of-life choice and cannabis referendums. This episode is our election special, so we're going to do things a bit differently today. We're sitting down with Pasifika candidates from Labour, National and the Green Party to find out about their respective journeys and their motivations for putting themselves forward. We also have a set of political questions that we will ask each of the candidates to answer for you to compare and make an informed decision. Let's hear from our candidates. Kia ora, Alfred. Thank you for taking time out of your campaign to join us today. How is the campaign going?
Yeah, kia ora Tupe. Well, it's going and it's fast, it's furious. We've had the lockdown and that means we've lost 2.5 months. So we're out there, we're putting out hoardings, flyers. We had a great campaign launch. We had about 260 people come, so there's a lot of energy. And I suppose there's a lot of expectation. This is going to be a close election. So for us, it's important, especially with some of the challenges we've had just of late. It's important for us to get out there and to work hard and to continue to connect with our community.
So a lot of people in your electorate will have the chance to interact with you over this campaign period. Today what we wanted to do was give people a chance to hear about your story and what motivates you and the journey you've been on. So you were the first Cook Islander to enter New Zealand Parliament. Can you tell us a bit about your upbringing and in particular the Pacific values that your parents instilled in you that you carry with you today?
So if I start off with my grandmother, so she was a big part of our upbringing. So my grandmother, my dad was part of 13 children, and so he was the third youngest. And my grandmother was actually half Polish, so her father was Marcus Goldstein, who made his way to the Cook Islands and then married my great-grandmother to Periariki, and so they had one daughter before he passed, and that was my grandmother. So her name was Rita Goldstein. And so when I grew up in Ponsonby, 142 John Street, so first generation of Cook Island descent. And I can remember the values that she taught us. They were really important. I remember one time my dad was saying, come on, we're all going to go down to Point Erin Bars down in Ponsonby. And my grandmother said, no, she doesn't want to go. And then my dad said, no, come on, Mum, you've got to come down. It's good for the kids. There's a swimming pool for the children, another one for the adults, and it's got a tuck shop and it's got a fence. And my grandmother simply said, well, if God wanted us to go to the swimming pool, he would have born us in the swimming pool. And as kids, you sort of don't understand. All you know is that we went to the beach instead of to the pools. But as you grow up, you realise that what my grandmother was doing was giving us, a value principle to live by. In other words, that as Pasifika, actually sometimes we confine to small spaces like swimming pools. We look about education, we look about health, we look about employment. In actual fact, what we should be thinking about is that our DNA of who we are as Pasifika is the whole of the Pacific. The Moana, we were the greatest navigators through the biggest oceans in the world. And so therefore our vision, our view, and even our values should have that form of expanse, to think that we can do even more than what other people think that is possible of us. And so I grew up with that, always believing the fact is that we could go out and we could do more. And so as a young person, I grew up with that sense that even though my mum was a cleaner, in the days we'd go up and help her on her third cleaning job up at the Chief Post Office or Newton, we were constantly working hard, working smart to get ahead. And so those values were always instilled in us, and also to find out what our true potential was, in life. And so because of that, I became an electrician, and at the same time too played sports, and then also did a theological degree. and then went on to, we were in ministry for 20 years, my wife and I, so my beautiful wife, Mokoena Fuemana, and we got married, we had 4 children, 2 grandchildren, and then we had finished ministry for 20 years, and then we were asked whether we'd be keen to go into politics and Parliament. Now, I never thought that was possible. In fact, I didn't want it at all. And my wife said, look, you got to go to the meeting. And it was at that meeting that they interviewed me and said, well, why do you want to become an MP? And I said, well, I don't. So why are you here? Because my wife told me to. And they laughed, and I said, no, if you see my wife, you'll understand. So they said, tell us about your story. I said, well, construction as an electrician, community development, did a theological degree, was a pastor as well. Never studied politics and never been in any political party. You know, and one of them said, well, then you're the perfect candidate. And I said, well, why would you say that? And it's because it's called the House of Representatives. So therefore, if you represent the view and vision and the values of your community, then there's a place for you. And so that's how I ended up in politics, and you know, that's been part of my my backstory.
You mentioned 3 very strong women in your life, your grandmother, your mother, and your wife. And yeah, I think a lot of the elements that you just mentioned now are, you know, displayed very clearly here in your office, about the things that are important to you. The other thing that struck me about your story is you've done quite a range of different things. So you've been a Sparky, you trained as a minister, and you went into consulting. How did those other roles prepare you for the political arena?
Well, when I sat back and I reflected on those different roles, responsibilities, those jobs, those careers that I had, I realised that each one actually is an important piece of experience and expertise. So when I think about the construction and the electrical work, it's being pragmatic. I mean, you know, when you're out in the field, the truth is that if you don't produce something, and if it's all talk, then you don't get paid, and therefore you don't eat, you don't do the things that are really important. So being pragmatic has always been a big part of who I am. The other parts of doing a theological degree, and then also being a pastor, where you learn how to have pastoral care. So you learn to be a good listener, to hear what people are, to understand, to connect with them, especially in sometimes some of the most challenging times, whether it be at the birth of their new child and their family, whether it be at their weddings, or even whether it be at their funerals. Pastoring also means that you also are preaching. So you learned how to be able to, what they call exegete a text, look at what the evidence is, and then you speak about that. So you learned how to preach, you learned how to talk in front of crowds and with people as well. The consulting side meant that I went over to places like Canada and got to see how big systems work and how they don't, and how we can improve them, and how you can take people with you. And so I suppose that I was bringing all of those elements with me, and each one of those careers actually helped me to be where I am here now, to fulfil what I see as a privilege and an honour to serve our community as a Member of Parliament.
So you talk a lot about family, and you know, over the last few weeks we've seen very clearly that you know, being in Parliament does take a toll on health and family, and of your many colleagues who have resigned to have cited those as factors in their resignation. And seeing how important family is to you, and the fact that you've been married for such a long time and you have kids and grandchildren even, and the importance that you place on fathers stepping up. How have you been able to balance your family life with your public life?
So one of the things I did when I was starting off is that I actually brought my family together, and that's part of what we do as Pasifika. So my immediate family with my wife and my children, and I shared with them, I said to them, look, this is an opportunity. What do you think? And my youngest son at that time, Shalom, was only 18 years old, and he said to me, you know, Dad, you've been there for us. You've supported us in school, you've supported us in our sports, and even in our education. Now it's your time. So know this, that when you step into this, you go with our blessing and you go with our support. And so for me, knowing that actually that my family were giving that to me, and that they were going to be part of the journey, was critically important. I believe it's also important that along the way that, you know, I said to my wife that, you know, you've giving her the right to veto, to look at my diary, to be able to speak into what I was doing. Because sometimes my habit is that I just throw myself into it and I just keep going. I can work hard, work smart, but sometimes you need someone else, and you give them the permission, which I gave to my wife, to be able to look into my timetable, into my diary, and actually say, actually, you need some time out. You need some time with us as the family. You need some time with me to do those things that are really important. So giving people permission to be able to moderate who I am and what I do, I think is really important. And being transparent about that too. So other people, that other family members, my parents and others that are around me, so connecting with them and hearing what they have to say. It's so easy in this place to get caught up in a whole lot of things. So they call it the 3 Gs, which is the girls, the glory and the gold, right? Which is about the fact is that, you know, you can go for the status, you can have people wanting to, you know, say that, you know, draw you away, seduce you into doing things that you shouldn't be doing and giving yourself to. And at the same time too that, you know, there where your heart, there your treasure is. So what are the things that you treasure most? So for me, it's always got to be family. Yeah. My faith, my family are two of the things that actually hold me in place.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've discovered the secret for a happy life, which of course is a happy wife. So
not always happy.
Well, it's time for us to take a break, but when we come back, we'll talk about social investment. I want to touch on something else that you've mentioned and that comes across very strongly, is that you are a man of faith, that you've trained as a minister, and last year you were contemplating breaking away from National and starting your own Christian party. Yeah. So why did you stay?
Well, first of all, just to set the record straight, I wasn't the one that said that. It was actually Barry Soper. So the media actually introduced the fact that I was going to be setting up a party. And the reasons they did that is that they looked at some of the changing values of our Pasifika people, in a sense that what the government of the day was saying. So there were the bills around euthanasia, there were the bills around the abortion law reforms, and even around the referendums around recreational drugs. And so people started saying, our Pasifika people were saying, actually, they don't like that. And so the media started saying, well, hang on, so Polynesian Christian, actually Alfred fits the bill, he'd be great. And if he set up a Christian party, people would go there. So people had been talking to me, so that's the truth. But really I didn't consider it. I believe the fact is that I needed to stay where I am in mainstream. I believe that I can make a difference here. And I looked at the values of the National Party and I could see that my Christian conservative Pasifika values could find a home. And so that's the reasons why I felt that actually I can confidently say that I can hold my position, my place, with all that I am inside the National Party.
So just on the issue of values, so some of National's core values are individual freedom and choice and hard work. And you yourself have mentioned the value that you and your family have placed on hard work. What are the parts of the system, because you mentioned as well that you were focused on systems change in your work in Canada. What are the parts of the system in New Zealand that are not working well and that we need to improve so that all Pacific peoples can have the best chance at succeeding? Or do you think that's all up to the individual?
So one of the things that I was proud of that I began to look at how we could change the system in the way that we think is that I remember sitting down with the Ministry of Pacific People staff and we were doing a strategic planning. And at first I was going to fall into the default setting of putting, you know, all the KPIs, you know, key performance indicators for health, for education, employment, the economy. And I stopped and I realized, no, that's not what it is. We need to change and reframe the way that we think and the way that we approach things. So I simply asked them to do this and to write it down. We need to learn how to articulate our cultural capital into a transaction. And we have capital. We've got an equity about what makes us who we are. What's our point of difference? What is it that we offer, not just to our own people, but to the world? And it's that, as my grandmother said, you know, we're meant to be swimmers in the sea, not just swimmers in a swimming pool where we're confined to small spaces. And so therefore we think that way, then what is it that we have to offer? So the challenge for us is being able to articulate that and to change that. When I think, for instance, as an example of how to articulate that, in 2011 when we had the Rugby World Cup here in New Zealand, it was the Tongan community who came out because I Kalatahi was coming, you know, their home team. So they gridlocked Auckland International Airport, you know, 8,000 of them, red and white flags, brass bands, they were so proud. Now I call that cultural capital, and if I was to articulate it, It's the ability to mobilise and motivate our people for one cause. And when they do, it's amazing. But did we get the transaction? Did we get a return? Did we get some acknowledgement of what we could do in that? No, we didn't. When I think about health, for instance, our immunisation rates, because we know how to use the cultural constructs of our church and our leaders and our villages. So what we did is that we showed that actually when it comes to immunisation, we have the highest immunisation rates in the whole of New Zealand. Why? Because we have cultural capital. When we think about pedagogy of learning and education, people are now talking about clusters. They're talking about global learning where we simply say we learn best when we learn together. Well, we've been doing that for a long time. It's in our history, it's in our heritage. And yet the fact is that we've not taken the gain from that cultural capital. So I believe it's time for us to actually step forward, to articulate what we know we do best into that mainstream space and to be able to get the transaction, the return that benefits our community. And that's why I believe that it's our time. That's the systems change that needs to happen. And no longer are we just confined to the factors is that we've got amazing sporting athletes that people are proud of in our country. Well, actually, they're more than that. They're not just able to be athletes, but there are those who can articulate and innovate new ideas. And so it's that. It's in our arts, it's in our sports, it's in our heritage, it's in our music, but it's also in our thinking and in our DNA. You know, that's where the ceiling needs to basically be lifted and allow us to enter into that space.
So you mentioned changes needed in education and health and other areas. Under the previous national government, the social investment approach took economic tools to try and achieve social outcomes. Is that approach likely to continue under the current leadership?
So it will continue. It's at the heartbeat of what makes us think about how do we do things better for our communities and for our country. And so it's about getting data. It's about then strategically knowing that if we were to put our efforts to early prevention and intervention, what would that look like so that we could get greater gains? It's about every dollar that we invest into this machine called government, how do we know that we get a return that does make a difference? And so our challenge was actually knowing how to articulate that. We know that it's actually important because even the current government have kept on the agency, they've reframed it, renamed it, but it still has the key elements to it. Where that works for our Pasifika people is the fact is that that big system, that big data is part of what makes us who we are. We know how to think in big spaces. We're global learners. We know how to connect, that connectivity between multiple different stakeholders. That's what we do all the time. You know, we hustle all the time. We know how to think and articulate and activate when we're in big spaces with big groups and big crowds. We're not afraid of that. And so therefore I think Pasifika are in the ideal place. And again, what I would like to see is about using this to innovate that. One of the areas is in particular around business. And so, you know, we only make up 1.2% of small to medium enterprises in our country. You know, we have over 600,000 businesses and we make up about 20,000 of those, that number. It's time for us to allow our people, social innovation and social investment will allow us to be able to do that and to take our place so that, like we are back home, you know, we're the owners of our own businesses, we run the country, you know, we control our communities. Why is it that we're not having our place here, our footprint that has an impression in our country? You know, those are the things that I believe social investment will allow us to do that.
Yeah, I think there are things that we are very good at that come to us naturally, that we need to emphasise those parts and harness them and make sure that they are recognised and rewarded. So you've been in Parliament for 9 years now, and you've done a lot of different jobs within those 9 years, backbench MP, opposition MP and even minister. So which of those jobs or which parts of the job do you enjoy the most?
Well, one of the things that when I first started, I said to people in my first year, so I came in 2011, I said, I'm here to sweep the floors and make the cup of teas. In other words, just to serve, do my apprenticeship and basically learn my craft, know what it means to be a member of Parliament and a politician. And I was honoured to be able to then, in the end of 2016, become a Cabinet Minister. So rose to the highest rank that you could in regards to being a Cabinet Minister and being at that table of decision making. But I have to say that, and even being a backbencher, in all of those, the principle hasn't changed for me because our role is to tauturu, it's to serve in our communities. And I haven't taken my focus away from that. So even as a backbench MP, even in opposition, I still say to people, you can still do work, you can still help people, you can still find solutions to some of the challenges and continue to inspire people for some new ideas and new ways. So still supporting people into trades and young people, into the polytechs as well, still going along to some of the graduations and schools, partnering on with young people and Pasifika people so that they can actually have their aspirations, whether it be in tertiary education, speaking around social enterprise and social innovation. You know, all of those things don't change who I am, irrespective of what role that I have. I still bring the same set of values and same focus.
Oh, me taki mata, that's all we have for this part of our interview. We wish you the best for your campaign.
Cool, thank you much. Kia ora, kia maniwe.
Alfred, what is the National Party's plan for Pacific peoples?
So our plan is to give them the greatest opportunity that's possible in education, in business, in employment, and in health. We know that there are NCDs, there are health issues and challenges that we have, but what we do differently is that we work with them. So we make sure that more Pacific providers are actually working with our communities. When it comes to education, you know, we want to make sure that they achieve at NCA level 2 and actually go into, whether it be tertiary studies, whether it be trades or whether it be in university. You know, education has always been the key for a lot of our people as well. But the other one that's also important is that we want to aspire for them to also to own their own businesses so that they too can be able to be like a number of other Kiwis, that we have over 600,000 businesses, but we only make up 1.2%. I don't believe that's good enough, and I think actually we deserve to be in that marketplace as well. So those things are really important. That's what we do. And for both Agnes and I, we're not just here to make up the numbers, to tick a box of diversity. Actually, our voice and our view and our values are important at the table of decision making for the National Party.
There's been a lot of talk about the disruption to the economy caused by COVID-19. So what's National's plan for the economic recovery and how do Pacific peoples fit into that?
So what's important for us is that we've always been about, when it comes to the economy, investment. So how do we invest? First things that we do is in infrastructure. So there's a huge amount of announcements that we've made around not only roading, but also some of the infrastructures around waterworks and waterways, things that are really important to a country and to a city. And what does that create? That creates more employment opportunities as well, more businesses, subcontracting that can go out there. There's a huge number of our Pasifika people that are in the trades already, both in construction and also in civil construction as well. Those things are really important. So for us, we invest in those areas that are really important. The other one is around trade. We're really important that we know that as a small Pacific nation, even New Zealand, we need to trade out. We were the ones that put together the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, also to the PACER Plus, which was with all the Pacifica nations as well. We're going into a post-COVID world where we're now got to rethink about what it is that we do. So we can still trade without actually people travelling to different countries. So how do we get more of our Pasifika people, whether it be in manufacturing, whether it be in growing? We've got a huge demand, for instance, in the agriculture and horticulture industry as well. We want to encourage more of our Pasifika people to enter into those businesses.
What would you like people to consider in the upcoming referendum on cannabis?
So I think what's really important when it comes to the recreational referendum on cannabis is that we already have medicinal cannabis. And so therefore this referendum is not about actually helping people to medicate when they're in pain. This referendum basically is to make it legal so that anyone in anywhere can basically grow it like a tomato plant in your backyard and smoke it anywhere in any place. And what that does is that sends to us a wrong message to our communities, and especially our Pasifika community. You know, law enforcement rehabilitation will tell us it's a gateway drug. At the moment, we've got laws that are in place to safeguard our people. For our Pasifika young people, I want to send a clear message to them that the evidence is really clear. The science says that actually smoking marijuana does a huge amount of damage to our thinking and to your brain. And so therefore we do not believe that this referendum will be good for our communities or our country, and also too for our Pasifika people.
And what would you say to the argument which is that if people are abusing cannabis and suffering from health impacts, that it's better to regulate so it can expose that and people can get the help that they need?
Well, that help is already there. What this is not about providing more support around counselling, around support around rehabilitation. This is actually about recreational referendum. That means that you can smoke it anytime, you can grow your own. That's a different story. So I don't believe that that point is actually the right argument that they're making. So if it is, that there's a health condition, if there's an addiction that people have, then why are we actually putting more services and more support in that way to be able to help them and to counsel them? Legalising recreational marijuana is not the answer to that issue.
What would you like people to consider in the upcoming referendum on euthanasia?
Well, the End of Life Choice Bill, to us, goes against all the values that we are as Pasifika people. When I was out there having the public meetings, whether it be in Auckland or down here in Wellington, you know, our community said this: our Pasifika culture is a culture of care. We know what it is when our people are sick and when they're dying. We wrap around them, we care for them, we love them. We help them go through the pain and the suffering that they're going through, and also the loneliness. And so what I would like to say is this: when we've got 39,000 submissions that were made, the largest in 165 years of Parliament, 90.6% oppose this. 1,700 doctors oppose this, and they oppose it on one key principle: it is unsafe. So therefore, if the medical practitioners, if the majority of New Zealand is saying this is unsafe, then I would encourage people to this: don't vote for this bill, because what that will do, it will change the values of how we see those who are sick and those who are elderly. It will also too go against the very thing that our health practitioners said, that this is unsafe for our communities.
What is the political achievement that you're most proud of?
I think one of the things that I'm most proud of is actually the work that we did on the World War I soldiers of Cook Islands in New Zealand. And there were 500, and they weren't really recognised or acknowledged. So to be part of that story, so that our Pasifika actually could have a place to say that actually, you know, we've got a price to citizenship as well. You know, our Pasifika men, our Cook Islands, and also 147 Niuean, they went to war in World War I. They sacrificed their homes, their families. They went to foreign places, and despite that, they still fought for king and country. And so I believe that one of the greatest achievements that I feel very proud of is to be able to be part of telling our story. So there are people, they cried. They realised that actually this is who we are. This is what we've done that makes a difference. And so we can have a pride of place. And there's, in the Wellington National War Memorial Park, we've got now a place, we've got now a monument, a sculpture that basically celebrates and commemorates the fact of what we contributed to this country. So that's one of the things I'm proud of. The other thing, I was proud to bring my grandson here, Carlos, when he was 6 years old this year. And he came in and he got to see Papa's place where he worked, where his seat is in Parliament, where his offices, walked around old Parliament as well. And I felt that as a grandfather and as a father, that, you know, that's the legacy that I feel that I can leave behind. That one day he'll tell his children and say, you know, I went one day to Parliament because, you know, my Papa was there. He was a member of Parliament that represented our community as well as our country.
Speaking of legacy, politics is a very cutthroat game, and you know, when your time is up, whenever that is, how would you like to be remembered?
I'd like to remember that that I was a person of integrity, that I said what I meant and I meant what I said. But also integrity means that actually when you've made a mistake, that you're honest enough to own up to it and you know, apologise and ask for forgiveness. I'd like to feel that actually I provided a pathway for the future of our Pasifika people and other people in our country, so that they too could say, look, he opened the door, he went through, here's a window of opportunity too. That they too could dream in places, again, as my grandmother said, that we are the navigators of the Pacific, the biggest ocean in the world. That our vision and our aspiration is not here, but here. And that's really the legacy that I feel that I'd like to leave behind.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Cool. Thank you.